I am Karin Hoskin, the Executive Director of the Cohousing Association of the U.S., and Karen Gimnig, wherever she is, she can wave. She is the Communications Director for the Cohousing Association of the U.S., and we're super excited to have you guys here. We're happy that Coho US can offer things like this web chat. If you have not had a chance in the last coming up on a year, please check out the website, cohousing.org. It's a whole shiny new website with all of the old information plus a whole lot of new information organized quite nicely. So our plan for tonight is we'll have a little presentation and then some time for question and answer. So I would like to introduce Betsy Morris, who is highly educated. Betsy, I hadn't realized, a master's and a PhD in city and regional planning. Principal planning for sustainable communities consulting practice, as well as a partner in Cohousing California. She is very experienced with 30 years of professional experience in some sort of community development field, 20 years of experience living in and visiting other communities all over the place. She coaches often co-housing seekers and speaks publicly or advises the public or private groups about co-housing development and affordability, which is what she'll be focusing on tonight. This was kind of prompted by the Affordable Online Conference on Affordable Cohousing coming up on February 22nd. I'll give you some details about that later. But in the meantime, let's hear some stuff. Betsy, tell us some stuff.
Thank you, Corinne. This is very exciting opportunity for me, and I have a great deal of passion for this topic for a lot of different reasons. And I'd say don't get me started, but you are getting me started. But just to let people know, the reason I post my credentials is because occasionally people have other opinions or experiences, and those are valid and important. But what I want to offer to people is that even if you've looked at the prices for sale in a particular co-housing community, don't give up and think co-housing is only for rich people. There's no possibility that I could ever live in community where I have safe, secure, a home that works for me financially. Don't give up. And so what I've done is taken my skills to create a picture of and try to gauge so we could understand how much variety in prices and strategies that communities have used to bring more variety, especially lowering the cost of housing for people who dream of living in community. And I do a lot of advocacy work around that currently, which I'd be glad to share on. But this is about the results of both work, a scan of strategies that I did in 2005, or was published by Cohousing e-zine in 2005, and has since been reprinted. And that's frankly still the most solid piece of work that I know of that really gives you the bird's eye view. Most of the writing and research is based on one case study, or in some cases, a developer like Katie McCammon, who can speak to a lot of experience, but she hasn't looked at the whole range of communities. The second source of information, so you know what, I don't actually.
It'll be up. We'll have
No, I'm just showing you. It's called Making Co-Housing Affordable, Strategies and Successes. And this is a reprint from Communities magazine, but for what, and I'm so happy that Coho US will republish it. Next, I'm going to also address some recent information, more 2017, that came out of the Co-Housing Research Network House Community Survey. So I'll bring that in there, and then I'll talk a little bit about the main strategies for external partnerships, and then be glad to get into Q&A and other topics. Okay, so what I want to start with is a picture. How do I show this picture?
You go to share.
Okay.
And you choose that from the.
So where am I? Share. Share. All right.
And then you pick it.
And then I pick it. Okay.
And then
So
you have share.
Share. Thank you. All right. So
Should be on everybody's screen.
there we are. So this is just 4 communities that I show to show the variety of co-housing communities that offer various forms, that offer essentially a lower cost units or subsidies in some way for people who have incomes that need to have more affordability in them, need to have more affordable housing. So there are 2 main ways that co-housers have kept down costs for building costs, and therefore the sales price of units. And Eastern Village Co-Housing is an example in Silver Spring, Maryland, where is internal strategies, basically very sharp use of tax credits, very sharp use of recycling a building, just a very sophisticated developer who knew how to build efficiently, and a community that liked and supported the design as it was going on. Eastlake Commons in Georgia has used a number of units there are subsidized, and Cambridge Co-Housing as well has a relationship with their local housing authority. I bring you to Berkeley Co-Housing, and I'll talk a little more about it, but this was where members of the community found that costs were rising, and they negotiated an arrangement with our local Berkeley City Housing Department whereby we put a price cap on our resale values. Therefore, for the next 30 years after we moved in, the resale prices would still be affordable to people of moderate income and now lower income. So let me, just to show you the variety. And I live at Berkeley Co-Housing. My husband Rains and I run Cohousing California from our little apartment, our little duplex deck, which is where this picture is taken from. So I'm gonna see, what do I move on? Yeah. So what is affordable? What does affordable housing? This is way smaller than I want it to be and a little more wordier than I want it to be. But it basically, to understand the term affordable housing, as it is federally defined, widely used in the industry, and legally enforceable, affordable housing means that no more than 30% of your gross household income is spent on housing costs, rent or mortgage plus taxes, HOA fees in some cases, and utilities in some places. But something like half of all renters in the Bay Area now pay more than 50% of their income for rent. So when we ask the question of why is this important, that's one reason, is that so many people are priced out of the existing housing market for either home ownership or rental. So, but in order to really get at what affordable co-housing is, I'll say what affordable housing is usually defined as and descriptive of is, number 2, homes and buildings where the cost of a unit will be no more than 30% of the incomes of the households who live in that unit. And there's often usually an income cap, which we'll get to later. Generally, these are the homes and buildings that local government uses to count whether it's meeting its requirements to provide affordable housing to lower income households, and the federal government and any federal funds or federally insured
I've got it.
affordable housing monies require that you use these definitions, and that some, so let me just say that there is this formal, legally widely used terminology that a whole industry works with. And so even though I'm just a newbie home buyer who's, doesn't want to spend a lot of money on my housing, it behooves you as a community to understand these guidelines and understand where you as a household and where you as a community with multiple households, where you fit within this framework, because you may be eligible for federal housing or local and state housing, either low-cost loans or grants in very rare cases that allow you to build and then sell your homes or rent homes at a lower cost than what the current market is calling for. Is that clear? I don't mean to just beat you over the head with it, but it is a whole industry, and so it helps to know where some critical terms are running. So, we don't usually, oops, sorry, got out of there. So let me just move on a little bit. Why do we care about affordability? Well, one is that Burning Souls and founders discovered that the cost of development in their area just looks too outrageously high for what they'll be able to afford in terms of a mortgage. So are all of you familiar with the idea that co-housing usually starts with a small group of core people who manage the process of buying the land or borrowing the money to buy the land, and then getting permission from the local governments, and then borrowing money to build, in particular, a new community or renovate. And then at the end of the day, those costs have to be turned into mortgages or in some cases rents to pay back all the loans. And there's elaborate roadmaps that you can see on that, but the upshot is we have to learn how to think beyond our household needs into what does this group need, and the political and larger community framework that's judging whether your project should be able to be built. It also matters if you're applying to certain co-housing communities that have these kinds of federal funds behind them, may require applications where you document your income in a way that you wouldn't do normally to your community members. So you need to just understand kind of motivations and legal requirements for your particular community. So some local governments, some states, California, Massachusetts in particular, and many cities now require a certain number of affordable units if you're building new housing, multifamily housing. Negotiating permits has to do with, you might be more attractive to winning local support if you're showing that you're offering greater income diversity. And many communities, when they're forming, want more younger families who typically will have less money or income. You may want racial diversity, and it could be that in some cases that reflects the economic wealth divide. But other communities want to have people living there, for example, people with a physical disability who are on a restricted income. So there's many reasons why communities want to address affordability up front. And there's also reasons we're discovering 24 years later why we have to address it for some of our members or in our Berkeley co-housing community who can't stay because their income has become too low for the HOA dues. They're paying half their income for homeowners fees. And we don't want people's quality of life or security to be threatened. So some of us voluntarily have been working on this. So when I began to look at the article, look around and do a scan, I used Cohousing L actually, and just my own personal knowledge to make a list of internal strategies, which are like the design elements that you can use to reduce operating costs or costs to buy. And these are just some of them, the most prevalent ones. Every community has its own mix of strategies that they used, and we now have, 160 communities. So when I started, there was 118, so, or even 60, I think, when I did this. So you can imagine how much ingenuity has gone into internal strategies. But I'm focusing, oops, I should have another one. I'm going to focus on what we call external strategies. All right, I'll just follow this. And here's an example of an external strategy. This is Pacifica Cohousing in Carborough, which was developed by one of the prime mover and shakers and architects for another community called Arcadia, which is possibly the most beautiful co-housing community around. They're all beautiful. But Pacifica Cohousing found a local community land trust, which I'll talk about later. Here it's called a community home trust for this particular county. But that is a group that shares ownership with a family that, and they share ownership in such a way that the cost of the home is less because the home has a deed of trust or an agreement that it won't be sold for extreme profit. So it'll be sold to cover the costs and to cover a small amount of increase in the market rate, but it won't be sold at market rate if market rate would make it unaffordable to families at this moderate or low income level. And those terms, moderate and low income, are set by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Every city, county, and metropolitan area has a table from HUD that every year tells you what's eligible for the programs that they fund or support. So this is part of the strategy, is to build small, but in fact, not everything is, it's not always the case that the more low-cost units are just singletons in a larger community. This particular example, Mariposa Grove, is just I don't know, half a mile from us. We often visit and hold events there with friends we have. This is also it's what's called retrofit community rather than new build. And all of the homes here, which are relatively small, are occupied by people who, when they moved in, qualified because their income was too low to meet market rate prices, but they also had the vision of wanting to share backyards, share all the regular community amenities that we think of in co-housing, a common house, common meals, and they partnered with the Northern California Land Trust. I'm a big proponent of land trusts, but there are other partners that groups have worked with that don't operate quite the same way. I could name some. Sand River, which is a senior co-housing community developed by a nonprofit housing developer called Santa Fe Housing Trust. Half the units are permanently lower cost, and half are market rate. And they work together as a community to make decisions about themselves, just like any other one. Let's see. Okay, so other examples of external strategies. This first column is just a sampling of, and of course it's alphabet soup here, but these are usually federal programs administered locally, so your local city or county decision makers set local policies, but this is money that's available to households, this first column. And so, for example, Arboretum Cohousing, which is a lovely community in Madison, Wisconsin, one of the advantages of having income diversity in co-housing and the skill levels of many co-housing people who are interested in co-housing is that one of their members was a lawyer who personally, on her as pro bono, walked all the home buyers, all the members who qualified for first-time home buyers assistance, which is often essentially free money for your down payment, and helped people to make sure they qualified for as much of this support as they were eligible for. But other strategies and programs exist that you can find out more about. The ones I really want to look at, I found in 2005, external strategies were partnerships. These have to do, I call them external because they involve either legal structures or partners that turn some of the units or hold title with some of the residents for their units, or they own the land underneath the property. So there are a few cases, I think very early on in Colorado, several communities had Habitat for Humanity build several homes as part of their usual, that nonprofit builds homes with using sweat equity, a lot of donated but high quality materials, and then there's the cost of the house. The housing is less for the residents, but a limited or shared equity cooperative, housing cooperative, which is a legal structure, it allows for a different strategy whereby the entire building, the entire property, and all of its members have an equal vote, an equal share, and can guarantee lower costs for the future. Community land trusts, I've already mentioned, these exist, I don't know how many around the country, perhaps 900, over 1,000. And so community land trusts have often started out with single family homes and just preserving future affordability by taking the cost of the land out of the equation of the mortgage. This is perfectly legitimate. You can still finance and do everything you need. But there are a small but mighty group of community land trusts that are now committed to supporting co-housing and also co-housing, which might be a cooperatively owned or a condominium structure. But in any case, they can be your friends because they are the most flexible entities around that can also navigate all the funding programs and requirements. I found them to be extraordinarily helpful, and I've lived in a community land trust cooperative myself. So another set of partners are nonprofit housing developers. They're sometimes called community development corporations. They're sometimes called community housing development organizations. But in California, we have, I don't know, just in the Bay Area, we have over a dozen. They build and manage many kinds of properties, not usually homeowner condominiums run by their residents, but that's not out of reach. Swan's Market and Cohousing would not have come into existence without the legitimacy, credibility, and nonprofit status of the East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, which is just a fantastic community-based organization that now serves people of all cultures in many parts of the Bay Area, but starting in Oakland. Let me keep going. These are the not so friendly. Okay, this is when I wrote this article. So let me just share examples of other communities that have used different external strategies.
Should we stop the screen share so people see you?
I don't really have a way to share it because it's a very small font table. But we can get into that. You know, it's always good to know what is it like to live in communities, in any community you're interested in, to visit. But we don't really have a good follow-up research base of what it's been like. I will say that Diane Margulis has written, Margolis at Cambridge Cohousing has written reflectively about the 20-year history of their community, including what it is like to have people coming from the Section 8 roles of the housing authority who don't really know what they're getting into when they move in, but some of them have ended up staying a long time and becoming valued community members, and others have just not found it a good fit for them. There's also, I will say, one cautionary example of a community, Mosaic Commons in Massachusetts, which was required and was committed to offering very green affordable units. And one upshot is the units didn't sell. One of the units didn't sell for a long time. And because it was so green, it was Spartan. And, you know, and although low cost matters, other values of people always apply when you're choosing your home. So it's important to know, you know, who's going to want what you're offering. Okay, let me just maybe stop there because we've gone on a bit, and I can offer a lot of other information. One of the examples, oh, I was going to talk about new numbers from the community, the Cohousing Research Network. Would you like to hear what I've found from that? Okay. One of the issues is I did a very wide scan, and based on personal knowledge and really talking to a lot of different co-housing groups, but it's not complete. The Cohousing Research Network was trying to get a better.
You need to switch to share that window.
Oh,
So
do I do?
stop share,
Okay, hang on.
Up top, stop share, and then go to that.
Stop share. Where? New share.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's always the issue of best available data, and where am I? There. This isn't very fun to look at, but oops. What's?
Just close that. Or
oh, let me move it over. I've got your chats coming up, and I
they're not
can't
seeing
read it.
They're fine.
Okay, so the other members of the Cohousing Research Network took my request to find out about affordable units, both privately subsidized or rentals, or publicly required or publicly supported. Unfortunately, the survey that was used was random, and out of 54 communities that replied, here's what I found. 8 communities reported that they were required to offer between 1 and 5 units at below market rates. And I'm using the industry language, my apologies. You know, these are still, this meant that a young family without a lot of income or down payment assistance was able to buy in. It means that a retired single woman, you know, who spent her life doing art and teaching kindergarten, you know, could afford to buy in. 8, but this is not a complete list of the whole universe of co-housing communities. But nevertheless, we know at least 8 were required to build 1 to 5 units. 5 communities reported being required to build 6 to 10 units, and the typical co-housing is perhaps 22, or the average is 22, at least the last time I did the census. And one community actually reported 16 to 30 homes, and actually this should be 2 because I went back to double check, and based on my own knowledge. What I also found is that 15 communities reported being voluntarily finding ways to create 1 to 5 below market rate units. And 7 communities reported creating 6 to 10 lower cost units voluntarily. And 2 communities reported more than 10 units. And I can tell you in this list here, LA Eco Village is a cooperative that some people don't consider to be, is a cooperative of 46 homes, 46 apartments and condos, and with common space, community gardens, self-governing. It's a beautiful place. And all of them are essentially limited equity and therefore affordable to people at low and incomes, but they're completely self-managed and voluntary. Troy Gardens is a community land trust, newly built, well, 15 years ago in Madison, Wisconsin. They, half of the units were below market, and when we visited, that meant they had a ton of young families and something like 25 children born in the year that we showed up. They don't have a common house because their budget.
Keep going.
My husband's picking. So I have these stories, and I know we also need to move along. But just to say, finish the thought. What I wanted to share is Rains and I visited, and we think they're wonderful. They don't have a common house because they're the community land trust that built them didn't have the money, wasn't able to get the funds. So we would love to suggest, because that at the next co-housing conference, which is going to be in Madison, maybe we can do a little solidarity fundraising and help them with their quest to build to have a common house. Just an inquiry, but at the very least, we should go visit if they're open to that. So there's actually, in my experience, more than 2 communities that have more than 10 below market rate units. And Elder Spirit in Virginia, there's some place called Walker Creek that I'm not familiar that reported their results. So this particular, here's some of the communities they named, and I can't really show you their private information, but they used a variety of financing strategies that's also in this database. So I hope to pull that out and be able to make it usable. Berkeley Cohousing, which I mentioned, is 100% below market for resales for 30 years, and that actually ends in 8 years. And so there's a great deal of ferment under the covers about where will some people go with their unit. Should we as a community try to do something about the end date? And it's always a good conversation to have. Where are each of our neighbors going? So, because money is a fraught subject. Leaving things for your heirs or creating a legacy for people who are currently excluded, both of them deeply important issues. Okay, so I tend to work at this public policy level and can go on and on about that. But let me stop and take questions.
Stop sharing, right?
So let me stop sharing, pause sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So how's that?
You're still sharing.
I'm not.
You gotta hit stop sharing.
Oh, I thought I was talking to you.
Wow,
I thought I was talking to you, the webinar people, not Rains. Okay, here we go.
I'm not seeing any specific questions in the chat, but so if any of you have a question at this point with the information that Betsy's presented, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
So Rains has been adding a lot of commentary, and you might ask me about that, but it's maybe a little more commentary than we need right now. But what's pressing on your minds is what I would like to know. Why did you join this? What are you hoping to get out of it? And what's your burning question? Let's start with that. Do you have a burning question, Jane or Apurani or Karen?
I'll start with a burning question. So I'm trying to develop a very specific co-housing. It's called the Chronic Illness Co-Housing Initiative.
Oh, beautiful.
And yeah, it's for people. My daughter has a disease. There are so many people with this disease, especially in Massachusetts where I live.
Mm-hmm.
I have a nonprofit status at the moment, and I'm just sort of floundering. These are folks who are very ill. And what's great about co-housing is that many of the people are homebound and they'd have the ability to actually see somebody on occasion.
Oh, yeah.
It just, everyone in the state thinks it's a great idea. I just don't know where to begin to look for possible funding, because these are people who are all on disability.
Yeah.
So, $10,000 a year. So it's, again, I don't know where.
Yeah. So of course you're going to start, you're going to eventually move in all directions, but as a team.
Yes.
So, but I would go speak to the state association, if there is one, for the disease that your folks have. And I would also speak to, ask around for the, Massachusetts has a fantastic nonprofit affordable housing industry. And
Huh.
the ones that have a lot of experience working with vulnerable populations, special needs populations, they know how to get funding, they know how to build, they know how to design. And some of them, or one of them, may have experience or interest in fostering a community that will be resident-led. And you have to decide to what extent you're going to fulfill that part of the co-housing model, because doing all your own management physically may not be possible, but that doesn't mean there can't be hiring of reputable
Right. There'd be
helpers.
live-in caretakers. There would have to be some live-in.
Well, and so, but think a little about whether, are you saying, so you could have live-in caretakers as part of the community, but
Right.
they're doing all the labor. That's not quite fair, but nevertheless, if they could get affordable housing, that might be a good deal in exchange for mowing the lawn or taking, or cooking meals for the person they're cooking meals for the community on behalf. So those details, though, you're going to have to work out with the people. You and your team will work out. But I would go talk. There's probably a statewide nonprofit housing conference that you could go to. But before you go pay money to a conference, just Google nonprofit housing developers in Massachusetts or in your part of the state.
Mhm.
There are restrictions that certain federal programs, like for seniors or for disability populations, and those two actually, I think, come out of the same funding pot. There used to be something called HUD 202 programs, but I may have the number wrong.
Okay.
You're going to learn a little bit, just enough to know who would be a good partner for you. And you
Okay.
could take some questions at the macro level of, like, tell them your vision, tell them who what size of community you're thinking of. Is it a house, a shared house? Is it small?
It's got to be individual, just because of sensory issues that are
Yeah, I'm learning, and privacy
and privacy.
But you might be able to do something where people have their private units, but if they don't need a live-in caretaker, but the caretaker could be in a co-op house nearby. The other thing I would encourage you to look at, by way of inspirational examples, is the Camp Hill communities.
I'm familiar with them.
I mean, they're amazing. And there's a house that operates as a radically inclusive house for, I think, people with disabilities or refugee immigrant status in one of those North Bay towns. Like,
Okay.
but just that's not, Camp Hill financing comes partly from the RSF Foundation, which is the Rudolf Steiner Foundation, and they have a whole apparatus to support projects that are based on that. Okay. There's also a community forming in Portland. Portland that's called what's it called? Our House, or anyway, it's meant to be a sort of neurodiverse community of people of different abilities, but they are still more or less independent living adults with or without a caretaker. But you can look at that up in the Coho directory of forming community in Portland, and they have land and have gotten some small, that not incorporated a nonprofit, and like you, it's a mother who's inspired, and she's gotten small grants to get this off the ground on a particular site. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we do have, not from my list. Go ahead.
I should probably move on to other questions.
Yes, please
even though
do.
I'm really interested.
Thank you. And say hi to Rains. I met him years ago.
Oh, he's right
Hey,
there.
Jane, great to see you again.
Yeah.
I'll be back here your way soon.
Okay. How are we doing, Corinne? Because this tells me I've got 5 minutes, and I'm sorry for that.
No, you actually, you have 17 minutes.
Okay, and we'll give follow-up
time.
Yeah.
So if there was some other information that you wanted to present, now would be the time.
I think I should take questions because I have a lot of information, a lot of strategic opinions, and
We'll get a few at
I'll
the
make
end.
that voluntary if anyone wants to hear that.
Thank you.
Hi. If you want to speak, Apralani, you have to go off mute.
There you go.
Thank you. No, I was just saying I would be interested in hearing what Betsy has more to offer, but I guess later would be good too. My question is not really a question, but let me just say I want to create a co-housing community and stay in Hawaii. We've been here for several generations. And I know there's a lot of people here that would like that too. I get a lot of support. And I've been learning about various aspects of co-housing for the past couple of years. And I also know that there's been different ways of attacking the affordability problem because cost is a humongous issue here and land is terribly limited. So
Yep.
we have both issues. I just found the website startup process and I'm really excited about it, the new website. So I'm working my way through that. But what I'm thinking about starting to build a team to help me, look at all these different aspects of how to do this so that I'm not taking the next 10 years just trying to figure this thing out by myself.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, building a team? Like I'm thinking, should I start a group on Meetup and charge a fee to kind of weed out the looky-loos and just build ways to build a team?
Other people have a lot more experience. I mean, Rains, for example, about how to use media, social media to engage with people. And it's definitely, at one time, the average was 7 years, right? And then it dropped to 5 years for getting a co-housing started when people started using developers. Became
right.
So from an affordability perspective, if you know you're going to be working in an arena where you want and where you'll have people eligible for these various federal subsidy programs or low cost loans or special loans, because the whole property and building will be meeting certain public goals for affordable housing or for density or whatever. So if you can stand not being in charge of the whole process, from start to finish and kitchen cabinets, I'm not saying you can't be involved. But if you're up for that, then I would say begin with local housing development partners, the same partners, community land trust, people who do this work, because development, you're going to do it once. There's other people who've done it dozens and hundreds of times. And if you find a sympathetic ally, they can absorb some of the labor costs up front, right? Whereas otherwise you and your first group need to be funding your own learning curve.
Right.
But there's places where you can learn more about options once you have a vision with other people. But I think you're doing both education. You're both meeting people and you're meeting allies and team partners, including many people in the affordable housing industry who like the idea and would love to live in a community.
Yeah.
So
it's very, what am I trying to say? Congruent with the way that the philosophy of life here. Yeah.
And also certain churches, I'm just going to say certain types of churches and people already have communities, already have property for one thing. And although you won't get it free, it's a base. So access to land, huge. Cultivating, like really strategically finding out who might want to pass on their land, to a small group, like what your vision is. But there's eco-villages that might also be in Hawaii that might be interested in having a group join them and build co-housing, on their 300 acres. You know, it's very interesting, the intentional communities world. You know, we're like the bourgeois end, but we're still part of that movement, in my opinion.
I found that there were several off the radar types of communities like that, especially on the Big Island.
Some
And
are
like,
off the radar and some are known. Some are,
some are known.
well, some are known and advertised and are legal. That's kind of the question, you know.
Right. That's
You can create a number of under the radar communities, but co-housing, its strength and some of its high costs are because it's legal above board, you know, it's legal and it's doing something that works within the current, you know, market system without being completely victimized by it.
huh.
That's my editorializing, but you get to know the communities, the intentional communities around you, and you may find allies who are like, we own this entire farm in common and we don't know how to ever get any of our capital back. And we'd like to have a better ownership title. So maybe these are people who could become your future neighbors. Do you see where? But I always see possibilities. So I should move on if there's another question.
I see Becca has one in chat.
If you don't mind. Thank you, Apolani. Good luck. Oh, yes. You know, Becca asked, Betsy, do you recommend that a starting group ask new members to determine where they sit as income in the local area median income or median household income? So who knows the number, question mark, in the group, just a small financial committee? Well, that is actually a great question. I wouldn't necessarily ask, you know, total newcomers to your group to reveal their family incomes. But first off, if you're applying for a mortgage or you're applying for eligibility for a first-time home buyer loan, you're going to do all of that homework and documentation. And plus, you need to be talking to your bank anyway. So at some point, yes, you could do it a couple different ways. If people are still not trusting each other, you could ask people to fill out, you know, household size, household gross income, and how much they're currently paying for all their housing costs. Do it anonymously. And you can post it up on a grid so that everyone can see that what this current form of this future community has as resources. You can also ask, how much income do you have available for down payment? And you don't have to ask people, how much money do you have stashed away or how much money your family is going to offer? But honestly, those are important to know as well, because many co-housing communities have gone through because some members have been able to loan their resources, loan their savings, or get family members, parents, or to loan money to the community in the phase when you're working on permissions. There's a committed group, and so they know somewhere they'll get paid back. So deal will fall through. I don't need to go into all that, but those are strategies where we can use our community-ness, our mojo of knowing each other to good advantage. And you don't have to have it all. Now, if in fact you are pursuing a path where people are going to need to be certified by the local city or the bank as qualifying for certain eligible affordable units or special loans, they're going to have to reveal all that. I say you can figure out the profile of the group anonymously. You can even do it initially with just make up numbers. And then there's an exercise where you take those numbers, you aggregate them, and that can tell you something about what's the maximum development loan you could get, or what's an average or median, better yet, you need a special calculator to get median. But anyway, depending on the size of your group. And you can practice the process of knowing what eligibility and affordability looks like. Let me just say here, Becca, that, and all of you, if you go to there's something called HUD portal, or just Google HUD portal, income and eligibility standards. Every year, HUD releases the numbers based on what's going on in a particular area median income for every city, county, but metropolitan area is usually what they're looking at and what various programs look at. So in the Bay Area, people making $150,000 are strapped and eligible for certain kinds. We're talking a 3-person household. They're making $150,000 and they're eligible for assistance. Now, the people who are truly strapped, because those people are competing and they're paying too much, but the people who are really strapped are the people under what's called 30% of area median income, which is basically about 200% of poverty and below. And those folks are on the streets. I know some great people living in vehicles now, and in some cases, and they're better off than the people living in tents. And I'll just say as an aside, one of my passions right now, and after this conversation, I'm going to go talk to a group of women, single moms who are unhoused, and they've banded together and they want to either take over a vacant lot, which is happening in Oakland, squat. It's a better word than squatting. They're pioneering community. Or they want to plan to be able to get access to land and then set up tiny home shelters. Tiny homes, which aren't legal to live in, according to HUD, but they're just RVs. And so we're strategizing how to create a tiny home, very low cost, hopefully debt-free community. And it's not the only one around. So just to wrap up again, HUD publishes official guidelines. Your local city will have those guidelines if you want to contact your housing department, or you can Google to find out anywhere in the country what the current guidelines for 2020 are. I think the new guidelines are they might change in July or something, but it's different for every area. Is there another last question?
I was going to say, I think we have time for one more.
Beautiful. Thank you, Karen.
This is a quick one. I'm from Canada. Just
Oh.
wondering and Linda as well. And I'm just wondering if in your travels you have met any names that come to mind that have done affordable kind of co-housing projects in Canada.
Visited Eco Village.
That's a good question because, but I don't know.
That's okay.
I know, and I've only visited the ones on the West Coast. Urban or rural? There is a Canadian Cohousing Association, and a conference coming up
In May.
Yes.
That's a great
People will
place.
be going. Yeah.
And that's, you can ask that kind of detail. It might be on their website, but honestly, I have not investigated Canada for this. So if you've learned something, please share it.
Okay.
Share it back.
Eco Villages that incorporate co-housing.
Well,
That's some affordability.
like which ones?
The one we went to, it was inland.
Not
Yeah.
Bellingham,
No,
but the one
Canadian Center.
it's called Windsong.
Windsong, yeah.
I think that might be the one that might, because it's quite large, and
the newer Vancouver downtown one.
and then there's a newer Vancouver one Rains has mentioned. Oh, I do know Eastside in Vancouver, which was a North Vancouver. I believe they did something that allowed several units are eligible for people with disabilities, and that might be disabilities and receiving some government stipend. So
Great.
usually. So give those a thought.
Thanks.
But send back the information if you can.
So thank you, Betsy. You shared some great information, and thank you guys for all being here. There is more information out there. There is
Exactly.
some pretty some pretty incredible, unique brainstorming happening, some things that actually are happening, and a huge push to figure out how to get more affordable, not only co-housing, but just housing in general, truly nationwide. So the Cohousing Association is offering our first online conference. That's the Affordable Conference on Affordable Cohousing. And I just put the link in the chat. It is coming up on Saturday, February 22nd. It's a 6-hour block on Zoom like this. It is organized just like a regular conference, except for you could be in your PJs if you want to be. So Betsy has been gracious enough to kind of do a preamble for that. Thank you very much. And then there's Katie McCammett is going to do a preamble as well a week from today. So Wednesday, same time, and that information is on the Coho US website. The best way to find information about the web chats without it being complicated, you can get at it several different ways, but just go to cohousing.org, and in the top right, the little search, type in web chats. And like I said, there's many ways you can get to it, but this information that Betsy presented tonight has been recorded, and that recording will be up on the website within a few days generally, as well as Katie's next week, as well as if you register for the online conference, if for some reason you can't make it, or you can only sit in front of your computer for an hour or two, the recordings of that event will be available to you as one who registered for the conference. So I think that's the updating I have. And yes,
yeah,
Betsy?
one last.
Absolutely.
So Rains and I are always percolating plans. I just wanted to throw out that I'd love to know the interest in people who might be interested in contributing financially on a Patreon campaign or GoFundMe campaign to basically allow me to put together a team to really re-look at the information at this bird's eye view, as well as specific strategies, and print something, publish something that's both as comprehensive as we can make it and as useful to people as we can make it. Maybe that's not just one article, but at the very least, if people are interested in the value of a bird's eye view of knowing really what's the co-housing census, of our current 160 communities plus allied communities, what are we doing to address this affordability crisis, a housing crisis nationally? Because I feel like, one, it would be valuable to the movement. It also would get out more of the strategies to build alliances with groups that haven't heard of co-housing or think it's some impossible luxury. So I would love to, if anyone wants to email me about whether they would consider supporting it if we create one. Of course, it would be contributing to Coho US. A portion of it would go to Coho US and the Cohousing Research Network. But to the best of my knowledge, I'm currently the best person to lead or manage an effort to get to the next level of our knowledge, and including looking at the efforts that have already come and maybe not succeeded as much as we'd hoped at the national level. So I would love to know if people would be interested in that at a later, however you find best to talk about that. Thanks.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I want to respect everybody's time. So thank you all very much for coming. And again, Betsy, thanks for talking, and Rains, thanks for doing whatever you do in the background.